The text message arrived at 7:43 a.m. while I was making breakfast for my daughters. Let's be clear. My body is no longer your resource. Deal with it. I stared at Laura's words on my phone screen, scrambled eggs burning in the pan behind me. After 14 years of marriage, my wife had reduced our relationship to a corporate memo. I typed back, done. My name is Jason Fairburn, and I'm a systems engineer for a telecommunications company in Dallas. I design networks that connect people across thousands of miles, but apparently I couldn't maintain a connection with the woman sleeping 20 feet away from me every night. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dad, something's burning, Beth said, sliding into the kitchen in her school uniform. At 13, she'd inherited my pragmatic streak and Laura's sharp tongue, a dangerous combination. Just the eggs, sweetheart. I scraped the blackened mess into the garbage disposal. Cereal morning? Mom already left? 9-year-old Janie asked, dragging her backpack behind her like a reluctant pet. She had an early meeting. The lie came easily now. Laura's early meetings had become as regular as my morning coffee. Hospital administrators apparently conducted a lot of business at 6 a.m. these days. I poured cereal into bowls, added milk, and watched my daughters eat in the kind of comfortable silence that only comes from routine. This was my world. The small moments, the daily maintenance of family life that Laura had gradually abandoned for whatever she was pursuing outside our suburban fortress. The house felt different without her morning presence. Cleaner somehow. Less tension crackling through the air like static electricity before a storm. I'd been walking on eggshells for months, trying to figure out when exactly my wife had decided I was the enemy. Can Diana come to my soccer game Saturday? Beth asked, mentioning our neighbor from 3 houses down. Diana? The orthodontist lady. She's really cool, and she actually watches the games instead of staring at her phone the whole time. Unlike your mother, I thought, but didn't say. Sure, if she wants to come. After dropping the girls at school, I drove to work through the familiar maze of Dallas suburbs, past strip malls and chain restaurants and the endless sprawl of middle-class dreams. My office sat in a gleaming corporate complex that looked exactly like every other gleaming corporate complex in America. Glass and steel and the promise of upward mobility for those willing to sacrifice their souls to quarterly reports. I'd been designing network architectures for 12 years, solving problems that existed only in the digital realm. Clean problems with logical solutions. Unlike my marriage, which had become a maze of passive-aggressive texts and meaningful silences that I couldn't debug, my phone buzzed with another message from Laura. Taking the girls shopping after school, don't wait up. No discussion, no asking if I had plans with Beth and Janie, just a unilateral decision delivered with the warmth of a parking ticket. I was being managed, scheduled around like an inconvenient appointment. The morning crawled by in meetings about fiber optic installations and bandwidth optimization. Technical problems I could solve with spreadsheets and engineering principles. If only marriages came with troubleshooting manuals and customer support hotlines. At lunch, I called my old friend Victor Mendez, who'd left the Army 3 years ago to start a private investigation business. We'd grown up together in Oak Cliff back when Dallas still had rough edges that hadn't been smoothed over by urban planners and homeowners associations. Jason, what's up, man? Victor's voice carried the easy confidence of someone who'd faced real problems in the Middle East. Hypothetical question. If someone wanted to know what their spouse was really doing during all those late nights and early meetings, how would they go about finding out? Silence stretched across the phone line. This isn't hypothetical, is it? Laura's been different, distant, secretive. I found receipts for expensive dinners at restaurants we've never been to together. She's suddenly very interested in yoga classes taught by some guy named Scott. Scott Williams? The recognition in Victor's voice made my stomach clench. You know him? Ex-cop turned security consultant. Runs a gym in Plano, teaches self-defense classes to suburban housewives. Real charmer, if you like the type who peaked in high school and never got over it. I stared out my office window at the parking lot below, watching people hurry between air-conditioned buildings like ants scurrying between hills. What kind of security consulting? The kind where he provides personal security to lonely wives whose husbands work too much. Jason, if Laura's mixed up with Scott Williams, you need to be very careful. Guy's got a temper and a history of not respecting boundaries. The rest of my workday passed in a blur of spreadsheets and conference calls that felt increasingly meaningless. I kept thinking about Laura's morning text, the casual cruelty of reducing our marriage to a business transaction. When had I become someone she needed to set boundaries against? I picked up the girls from school and drove them to Beth's soccer practice, parking beside the other parents in their SUVs and minivans. The suburban ritual of youth sports, folding chairs and orange slices, and the desperate hope that our children would be better than us at something. Diana walked over from her car, carrying a travel mug of coffee and wearing scrubs from her orthodontic practice. She was recently divorced, friendly in the way of people who understood that life didn't always follow the script you'd written in your 20s. "How's the network business?" she asked, settling into the chair beside mine. "Connecting people who don't want to talk to each other, same as always." I watched Beth sprint across the field, her ponytail bouncing with each step. "How's the teeth business?" "Straightening smiles for kids who'll probably need therapy later anyway." Diana's laugh was warm and genuine. "At least it's honest work." We sat in comfortable silence, watching our kids run around in the Texas heat. This felt normal, two adults sharing the simple pleasure of watching children play. No hidden agendas or passive-aggressive texts, just human connection without conditions. "Mom's not coming?" Janie asked during the drive home. "She's working late again." "She's always working late now," Beth said from the passenger seat. "It's like she doesn't want to be home anymore." Out of the mouths of babes. My 13-year-old had diagnosed our family dysfunction with surgical precision. Laura wasn't just absent physically, she'd checked out emotionally months ago, leaving me to maintain the illusion of normal family life while she pursued whatever was making her so eager to escape our house. That evening, I made dinner for 3 instead of 4. Spaghetti with meat sauce, garlic bread, and a salad that the girls would ignore. We ate at the kitchen table, talking about school and soccer and the upcoming science fair. Normal conversation that felt precious because it was becoming rare. Laura came home at 9:30 after the girls were in bed. She moved through the house like a ghost, gathering clothes and toiletries with the efficiency of someone who'd rather be somewhere else. "Good workout?" I asked, noting that her yoga clothes looked suspiciously fresh for someone who'd supposedly spent 2 hours stretching and meditating. "Fine." She didn't look at me, just continued packing her gym bag for tomorrow's session. "The girls missed you at dinner. I told you I was working late." "Right. The hospital emergency that required yoga pants." Laura finally looked at me, her eyes cold and distant. "I don't owe you a detailed schedule of my activities, Jason. We're married, not merged." She disappeared into the guest bedroom, where she'd been sleeping for the past month. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. I sat in my living room, surrounded by the accumulated debris of our life together. Family photos, kids' artwork on the refrigerator, a mortgage we'd signed with such optimism 12 years ago. Everything looked the same, but the foundation had shifted somehow, leaving cracks that were growing wider every day. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your wife's car was parked outside the Marriott on Beltline Road tonight. Thought you should know. A friend." I stared at the message until the words blurred together. Someone in our neighborhood had seen Laura's car at a hotel. Someone who knew both of us well enough to have my phone number, but not well enough to sign their name to the information. The pieces were falling into place with the horrible clarity of a logic puzzle solving itself. The late nights, the yoga classes, the sudden need for boundaries in our marriage. Laura wasn't just pulling away from me. She was running towards someone else. I deleted the anonymous text and turned off my phone. Tomorrow I would start looking for answers, but tonight I just wanted to sit in the ruins of my marriage and mourn what we'd lost. I woke up at 5 a.m. with the grim determination of a man who'd decided to stop being a fool. The anonymous text had crystallized something that had been building for months. I needed to know exactly what Laura was doing during her mysterious absences. She was already gone when I got to the kitchen, another early meeting that apparently required full makeup and her best perfume. The coffee pot was still warm, which meant she'd left within the last hour, probably meeting Scott Williams for breakfast before their yoga session. I made breakfast for the girls, drove them to school, and arrived at my office by 8:30. But instead of diving into network diagrams and system specifications, I spent the morning doing research on Scott Williams. What I found made my stomach turn. The guy had a Facebook page full of shirtless gym photos and inspirational quotes about living your truth and breaking free from toxic relationships. His business website advertised personal security consulting and lifestyle coaching for empowered individuals. But it was his Instagram that really told the story. Photo after photo of Scott with various women at bars, restaurants, and hotel pools. Always the same pose, his muscled arm around their shoulders, his cocky grin suggesting he was doing them a favor by existing. The captions were masterpieces of pseudo-philosophical BS. Life is too short for settling, and your happiness is your responsibility. I was studying a particularly nauseating selfie when my desk phone rang. The caller ID showed Laura's office number. "Jason, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "I'm at work. Tonight, after the girls go to bed." The line went dead. Laura had always been efficient with her communications, but lately she'd adopted the clipped tone of someone delivering bad news to subordinates. I was being summoned to my own execution. The rest of the day dragged by in slow motion. I tried to focus on a fiber optic installation project, but my mind kept wandering to the conversation ahead. Laura wanted to talk, which probably meant she was ready to make her affair official. The thought of explaining divorce to Beth and Janie made me feel sick. I picked up the girls from school and took them to McDonald's for dinner, a rare treat that they accepted with the suspicious enthusiasm of children who sensed something was wrong. We ate Happy Meals and played on the playground until the sun started setting, delaying the inevitable return home. Laura's car was in the driveway when we pulled up. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a manila folder in front of her, looking like a lawyer preparing for a deposition. The girls hugged her and chattered about their day, but she responded with distracted half-attention, her mind clearly elsewhere. After I got Beth and Janie settled with homework and baths, Laura and I faced each other across the kitchen table like opposing generals negotiating a surrender. "I want a divorce," she said, opening the manila folder to reveal a stack of legal documents. "I've already consulted with an attorney." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting them. "Just like that? No counseling, no attempt to work things out?" "We've been working things out for months, Jason. It's not working. We've been avoiding each other for months. That's not the same thing." Laura's laugh was bitter and cold. "You want to talk about avoidance? You've been emotionally unavailable for years, always buried in your computer, always solving everyone else's problems except the ones in your own house. I've been trying to provide for this family. Remember the mortgage, the car payments, Beth's braces? Money isn't everything, Jason. I need more than a reliable paycheck and someone who shows up for dinner." I leaned back in my chair, studying my wife's face. She looked different somehow, harder, more confident, like someone who'd been taking lessons in how to be cruel. "What kind of more are we talking about? The kind that involves yoga classes with Scott Williams?" Laura's composure cracked for just a moment, surprise flickering across her features before she regained control. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. You're having an affair with your yoga instructor, and now you want to blow up our family so you can play house with a guy who peaked in high school. Scott has nothing to do with this. Scott has everything to do with this. You think I'm stupid, Laura? The late nights, the mysterious meetings, the sudden need for boundaries. You've been planning your exit strategy for months." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the kitchen floor. "You're being paranoid and controlling. This is exactly why our marriage doesn't work. Our marriage doesn't work because you've been sabotaging it. When did you decide I was the enemy?" "When I realized I was dying inside this suburban prison you built for us. When I understood that I was never going to be more than your supporting character." The accusation stung because it contained just enough truth to hurt. I had gotten comfortable, maybe even complacent, but I'd never stopped loving her, never stopped trying to build something good for our family. "So your solution is to run off with a guy who seduces married women for a living?" Laura's eyes flashed with anger. "Scott understands me in ways you never have. He sees me as a complete person, not just a wife and mother. He sees you as his next conquest. You're not special to him, Laura. You're just another bored housewife with a credit card and daddy issues." The slap came so fast I didn't have time to duck. Laura's palm connected with my cheek with a sharp crack that echoed through the kitchen. We stared at each other in shocked silence, both surprised by the violence. "Don't you ever speak to me like that again," she whispered. I touched my cheek, feeling the heat from her hand. "The truth hurts, doesn't it? You want the truth? Here's the truth. I haven't been happy in this marriage for years. I've been going through the motions, pretending everything was fine, dying a little more each day. Scott didn't seduce me, Jason. He saved me. He's using you. Maybe. but at least he makes me feel alive. Laura gathered her legal documents and headed for the stairs. At the doorway, she turned back to face me. I'm filing for divorce next week. I want the house, primary custody of the girls, and half of everything else. My lawyer says it's a reasonable request. Your lawyer can go to heck. His name is Claire Barnett, and she's very good at what she does. You might want to get your own attorney, Jason. This doesn't have to be ugly, but it will be if you try to fight me. She disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the wreckage of our marriage scattered across the table. I picked up one of the legal documents, a petition for divorce citing irreconcilable differences and emotional abandonment. My phone buzzed with a text message. Laura, from upstairs. I'm staying in a hotel tonight. We both need space to process this. 20 minutes later, I watched from the living room window as she loaded 2 suitcases into her car and drove away. She didn't look back at the house, didn't wave goodbye to the life we'd built together. She just left, as cleanly and efficiently as she'd delivered the news of our divorce. I sat in my empty house, surrounded by family photos that now felt like evidence from a crime scene. 14 years of marriage, 2 beautiful daughters, and a shared history that Laura was ready to discard like last week's newspaper. But she'd made one critical mistake in her carefully planned exit strategy. She'd underestimated me. Laura saw me as a passive, predictable, suburban dad who would roll over and accept whatever terms she dictated. She had no idea what I was capable of when properly motivated. I pulled out my phone and called Victor Mendez. I need your help, I said when he answered. My wife just served me with divorce papers, and I think it's time to level the playing field. What do you need? Everything you can find on Scott Williams. Bank records, criminal history, employment records, social media activity. I want to know what kind of man my wife is throwing away our family for. Jason, be careful. Divorce makes people do crazy things. Laura's the one doing crazy things. I'm just going to make sure she understands the consequences of her choices. After I hung up, I walked through my house, really looking at it for the first time in months. The family photos on the mantle, Beth's soccer trophies on the bookshelf, Janie's artwork covering the refrigerator. This wasn't just a suburban prison. It was a home, built with love and sacrifice and the daily commitment of 2 people who'd promised to face life together. Laura wanted to throw all of that away for a muscle-bound yoga instructor with a history of seducing married women. She thought I would just accept her decision and quietly fade into the background of her new life. She was about to learn how wrong she could be. Victor called me at work the next morning with information that made my coffee taste like battery acid. Scott Williams has quite a resume, he said, his voice carrying the flat professionalism of someone delivering bad news. 3 complaints filed against him in the last 5 years, 2 for stalking, 1 for assault. Nothing stuck because the women dropped the charges, but there's a pattern here. I closed my office door and sat down hard in my desk chair. What kind of pattern? He targets married women in their 30s and 40s. Usually professionals with money and low self-esteem, yoga classes, self-defense courses, personal training. He's got multiple ways to get close to them. Then he love bombs them until they leave their husbands, drains their bank accounts, and moves on to the next mark. How many women are we talking about? At least 6 in the last 3 years that I can document, probably more who were too embarrassed to file complaints. I stared out my office window at the parking lot below, watching people hurry between buildings in the Texas heat. Laura thought she'd found her soulmate, but she was just the latest victim in Scott's suburban hunting operation. There's more, Victor continued. Williams filed for bankruptcy 18 months ago. Lost his house, had his truck repossessed, owes back taxes to the IRS. Your wife isn't just his next conquest, she's his retirement plan. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Scott hadn't swept Laura off her feet with his charm and philosophical wisdom. He'd identified her as a target, studied her vulnerabilities, and executed a carefully planned seduction designed to separate her from her family and her money. I need copies of everything, I said. Already on the way to your email. Jason, what are you planning to do with this information? I'm going to save my marriage and protect my daughters from a predator. That evening, I picked up Beth and Janie from school and took them to Diana's house for dinner. She'd offered to watch them while I dealt with what she diplomatically called the Laura situation. Diana was turning out to be a good friend, the kind of person who helped without asking too many questions. How are you holding up? she asked while the girls played video games in her living room. I've been better. Laura filed for divorce yesterday. Diana's face softened with sympathy. I'm sorry, Jason. I know this must be incredibly difficult. The worst part is that she's being manipulated by someone who's done this before. She thinks she's found true love, but she's just another mark in a con game. Have you tried talking to her? Laura's not interested in hearing from me right now. She's convinced that I'm the problem, and Scott Williams is the solution. I showed Diana some of the information Victor had uncovered, the bankruptcy filing, the complaints from other women, the pattern of predatory behavior. Her expression grew darker as she read. This is awful, she said. These women trusted him, and now he's got his hooks in Laura. She's going to lose everything, the house, her savings, probably her relationship with the girls, all for a guy who'll disappear the minute he's drained her bank accounts. Diana handed the papers back to me. What can you do to stop it? I'm not sure yet, but I'm not going to stand by and watch my family get destroyed by a con artist. After dinner, I took the girls home and helped them with homework. Normal evening routine in an increasingly abnormal situation. Beth kept asking when Mom was coming home, and I kept giving vague answers about work trips and temporary arrangements. At 9 p.m., my phone rang. Laura's number. We need to discuss custody arrangements, she said without preamble. We need to discuss a lot of things, starting with Scott Williams' bankruptcy filing and his history of stalking women. Silence stretched across the phone line. When Laura spoke again, her voice was tight with anger. You've been investigating Scott? I've been protecting my family from a predator. Did you know he's done this exact same thing to at least 6 other women? The yoga classes, the personal attention, the promises of a new life, it's all a script he's memorized. You're lying. I have documentation, court filings, police reports, bankruptcy records. Your soulmate is a professional con artist who targets lonely wives with money. Scott warned me you'd try something like this. He said you'd get desperate and start making up stories. The casual way she mentioned Scott's predictions made my blood run cold. He'd been coaching her, preparing her for my inevitable discovery of his true nature. This wasn't a spontaneous affair. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to isolate Laura from anyone who might interfere with his plans. Laura, listen to me. You're being manipulated by someone who's done this before. He doesn't love you. He loves your bank account and your house, and your willingness to believe his lies. I'm not discussing this anymore. My lawyer will be in touch about custody arrangements. The line went dead. I sat in my living room, staring at the phone and trying to process the conversation. Laura wasn't just having an affair, she was being systematically brainwashed by someone who'd turned manipulation into an art form. I called Victor back and filled him in on Laura's response to the information about Scott. She's in deep, he said. Williams has probably been telling her that you're controlling and emotionally harmful, that you'll try to destroy their relationship with lies and false accusations. It's classic isolation technique. How do I get through to her? You might not be able to, at least not directly. But there are other ways to handle this situation. What kind of other ways? Let me make some calls. Williams isn't the only one who can play psychological games. The next morning, I woke up to find my car vandalized. Someone had keyed deep scratches along both sides and slashed 2 tires. A note was tucked under the windshield wiper. Back off or it gets worse. I called the police, filed a report, and had the car towed to a repair shop. But I already knew who was responsible. Scott Williams was escalating the situation, trying to intimidate me into backing down from my investigation. He'd picked the wrong target. I called in sick to work and spent the day installing security cameras around my house. If Scott wanted to play intimidation games, I was going to make sure every move he made was documented. I also changed the locks and installed a new alarm system that would wake the entire neighborhood if anyone tried to break in. That afternoon, while I was testing the new cameras, a black pickup truck drove slowly past my house. The driver wore sunglasses and a baseball cap, but I could see enough of his face to know it was Scott Williams. He was casing my house, probably planning his next move in the campaign to scare me away from Laura. I stepped out onto my front porch and waved at him like he was a friendly neighbor. Scott hit the gas and disappeared around the corner, but not before my new security camera got a clear shot of his license plate. My phone rang 20 minutes later. Laura, furious. Scott says you threatened him. Scott's lying. I waved at him when he drove by my house. If he considers that threatening, maybe he's not as tough as he pretends to be. Stay away from him, Jason. I'm warning you. Or what? He'll key my car again? Slash more tires? Your boyfriend's already shown his true colors, Laura. The question is whether you're ready to see them. You're paranoid and delusional. Scott left a threatening note on my windshield this morning. I have security footage of him driving by the house. Your knight in shining armor is actually a coward who vandalizes cars and threatens people from the shadows. Another long silence. When Laura spoke again, her voice was smaller, less certain. You're making this up. I'm filing a police report this afternoon. Scott Williams is about to discover that intimidating a systems engineer with security cameras and a paper trail is a very bad idea. After I hung up, I sat in my living room and reviewed the footage from my new cameras. Scott's truck, his license plate, his face clearly visible as he scoped out my house. Evidence that would be very difficult for him to explain to a judge or a jury. Laura wanted a divorce, and she was probably going to get one. But she wasn't going to destroy our family for a con artist who threatened people and vandalized property. Scott Williams had made this personal, and I was going to make sure he regretted that decision. The underdog was about to bite back, and it was going to hurt. The police report I filed against Scott Williams created ripples that spread through our suburban community like cracks in ice. Within 48 hours, everyone in our neighborhood knew that Laura Fairburn was having an affair with a man who vandalized cars and left threatening notes. I didn't have to spread the gossip myself. Mrs. Henderson from the Homeowners Association did that for me, along with half the soccer moms who'd been watching our domestic drama unfold with the fascination of people observing a train wreck from a safe distance. I always thought there was something off about that yoga instructor, Diana told me while we watched the girls play in her backyard. Too smooth, like a used car salesman trying to sell you a lemon. The social pressure was having an effect on Laura. She'd called me 3 times in 2 days, each conversation more defensive than the last. Scott was coaching her responses, but even he couldn't script away the embarrassment of being associated with someone who'd been reported to the police for criminal mischief. Victor called me at work with an update that made me smile for the first time in weeks. Williams is getting nervous, he said. I've been asking questions around his gym, talking to some of his former clients. Word is getting out about his history with married women, and it's not good for business. What kind of questions? The kind that make people wonder why a self-defense instructor has so many complaints filed against him by women. His boss at the gym is starting to ask uncomfortable questions about liability and insurance. I leaned back in my office chair, feeling something that might have been hope. How much pressure can we put on him before he breaks? Depends how much you want to escalate this. Williams is used to dealing with suburban housewives who don't fight back. He's not prepared for someone who knows how to use the system against him. That evening, I got a text from an unknown number. Meet me at Starbucks on Beltline Road, 8 p.m. Come alone. I knew it was Scott even before I arrived, and saw him sitting in the corner booth wearing a tight black t-shirt that showed off his gym muscles. He looked exactly like his social media photos, artificially tanned, carefully groomed, and radiating the kind of aggressive confidence that intimidated some people and annoyed others. I bought a coffee and sat down across from him, studying the man who'd convinced my wife to throw away 14 years of marriage. You're causing problems for me, he said without preamble. You caused problems for yourself when you decided to target my family. Scott leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Laura's not your property, Jason. She's a grown woman who can make her own choices. You're right. She can choose to get involved with a con artist who's bankrupted himself and has a history of stalking women. But I don't have to make it easy for you. You filed a false police report. I filed an accurate police report about vandalism and threats. If you don't like the consequences, maybe you should reconsider your methods. Scott's jaw tightened, and I could see him struggling to control his temper. This was a man used to intimidating people with his physical presence. But we were in a public place surrounded by witnesses. He couldn't resort to his usual tactics. Laura told me about you, he said. The controlling behavior, the emotional misuse, the way you've been holding her back for years. Laura told you what you wanted to hear? It's called love bombing, Scott. You made her feel special and understood, then gradually isolated her from everyone who might interfere with your plans. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Jennifer Morrison, Rebecca Chen, Sandra Williams, ring any bells? 3 women who filed complaints against you for stalking after you drained their bank accounts and moved on to your next target. The color drained from Scott's face. He hadn't expected me to know the names of his previous victims, hadn't prepared for someone who'd done actual research instead of just reacting emotionally. "Those women were unstable," he said. "They couldn't handle the end of our relationships. They were marks in your con game, just like Laura is now." Scott stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Several other customers looked in our direction, drawn by the tension crackling between us. "Stay away from me and Laura, or you'll regret it," he said, loud enough for half the coffee shop to hear. "Is that another threat? Because I'm recording this conversation on my phone, and there are about 20 witnesses who just heard you threaten me." Scott looked around the coffee shop, suddenly aware that his intimidation tactics were backfiring spectacularly. He was used to operating in shadows, not making threats in public places where his behavior could be documented and reported. "This isn't over," he muttered, then walked quickly toward the exit. "You're right," I called after him. "It's not over. It's just getting started." I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, sipping my drink and reviewing the recording of our conversation on my phone. Scott Williams had just made several admissions that would be very useful in court, including his acknowledgement that he was deliberately interfering in my marriage. More importantly, he'd lost his composure in public. The smooth, confident yoga instructor who seduced married women with philosophical BS had revealed himself to be a common thug who made threats when his con games were exposed. My phone buzzed with a text from Laura. "Scott said you threatened him at Starbucks." I typed back, "I recorded our entire conversation. Would you like me to send you the audio file so you can hear exactly what your boyfriend said to me?" No response. An hour later, another text. "We need to talk. I'm listening. Not over text. Tomorrow night, the house, after the girls are asleep." I drove home feeling something that might have been optimism. Laura wanted to talk, which meant Scott's version of events wasn't matching what she'd expected to hear. Maybe the recording of his threats had cracked the facade he'd been maintaining for her benefit. Or maybe she was planning to escalate the situation herself. With Laura, it was always hard to tell. I spent the evening helping Beth and Janie with homework and listening to their chatter about school and friends and the normal concerns of children whose parents were destroying their family. They didn't know about the divorce papers yet, didn't understand why Mom was staying in hotels and Dad was installing security cameras. But they sensed the tension. Kids always do. "Is Mom coming home soon?" Janie asked while I tucked her into bed. "I hope so, sweetheart. Mom and Dad are working through some grown-up problems right now. Are you getting divorced like Tommy's parents?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I sat down on the edge of her bed, trying to find words that were honest but not terrifying. "I don't know, Janie. But whatever happens between Mom and me, we both love you and Beth very much. That will never change." She nodded solemnly, accepting my answer with the resilience of a 9-year-old who'd already figured out that adult promises weren't always reliable. After the girls were asleep, I reviewed the security footage from my cameras and checked the locks on all the doors and windows. Scott Williams was escalating the situation, and I needed to be prepared for whatever he might try next. Tomorrow night's conversation with Laura would determine whether our marriage could be saved or whether I'd be fighting a divorce battle against a woman who'd been brainwashed by a professional con artist. Either way, I was ready for war. Laura arrived at exactly 8 p.m. the next evening, letting herself in with the key she still carried. She looked tired and uncertain, lacking the cold confidence she'd displayed when serving me with divorce papers. Scott's public meltdown at Starbucks had apparently shaken her more than she wanted to admit. "The girls are asleep?" she asked, settling into the living room chair farthest from where I was sitting. "Beth's reading, Janie's out cold, we've got privacy." Laura fidgeted with her wedding ring, which she was still wearing despite everything that had happened, a small detail that gave me hope. "I listened to the recording you sent me," she said, "and Scott says you edited it to make him sound threatening." I pulled out my phone and opened the audio file. "Would you like me to play the whole thing, unedited from start to finish? You can hear him admit that he's been coaching you about my alleged controlling behavior. He was trying to help me understand he was manipulating you, Laura. Everything he told you about me, about our marriage, about your need for independence, it's all part of a script he's used on at least 6 other women." I handed her the folder Victor had compiled on Scott Williams. Bank records, police reports, complaints from previous victims, documentation of his pattern of targeting married women with money and low self-esteem. Laura read through the papers with growing horror, her face paling as the scope of Scott's deception became clear. "This can't be right," she whispered. "It's all public record. Court filings, Bankruptcy documents, police reports. Your soulmate is a professional con artist who saw you coming from a mile away. But he understands me. He makes me feel special, appreciated, like you're the only woman who's ever truly understood him. I leaned forward, watching her face. That's called love bombing, Laura. It's the first stage of psychological manipulation. He studied you, figured out what you needed to hear, and told you exactly what would make you fall for him. Laura's hands were shaking as she set down the folder. He said you'd try to turn me against him with lies and false evidence. And you believed him because he'd already convinced you that I was the enemy. Classic isolation technique, separate the victim from anyone who might interfere with the con. I'm not a victim, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Rebecca Chen thought the same thing. So did Jennifer Morrison and Sandra Williams. They all believed Scott was their ticket to a better life, right up until he cleaned out their bank accounts and moved on to his next target. I showed her the social media posts Victor had uncovered. Photos of Scott with various women at restaurants and hotels, all tagged with the same inspirational quotes about living your truth and breaking free from toxic relationships. He posts the same philosophical BS with every woman he seduces, I said. You're not special to him, Laura. You're just another mark in a con game he's been running for years. Laura stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at our quiet suburban street. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. I've been such a fool. You've been manipulated by someone who's very good at what he does. Scott Williams is a predator who targets intelligent, successful women who are going through difficult periods in their lives. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that someone could see me as more than just a wife and mother. You are more than a wife and mother. But you're also my partner, the mother of our children, and the woman I've loved for 14 years. Scott Williams saw you as a bank account with legs. Laura turned back to face me, tears streaming down her cheeks. What have I done to our family? You made a mistake. A big one, but not necessarily a fatal one. How can you even look at me after what I've put you through? I stood up and crossed the room to where she was standing. Because I love you, Laura. I love the woman you were before Scott Williams got his hooks in you. And I love the woman you can be again once you're free of his influence. The divorce papers can be withdrawn. The custody arrangements can be canceled. We can start over if you're willing to fight for our marriage. Laura collapsed into my arms, sobbing with the intensity of someone who'd been carrying an impossible burden. I held her while she cried, feeling 14 years of shared history and genuine love flowing between us like an electric current. I'm so sorry, she whispered against my chest. I'm so sorry I almost threw everything away for someone who was using me. We'll get through this, I said. But first we need to deal with Scott Williams. He's not going to disappear quietly when he realizes he's lost his meal ticket. As if summoned by our conversation, headlights swept across our front window. A black pickup truck was parked across the street, its engine running. Scott Williams was watching our house, probably wondering why Laura's car was in our driveway instead of at his apartment. He followed me here, Laura said, fear creeping into her voice. Good, let him watch. Let him see that his con game is over and his victim has figured out what he really is. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Tell your wife to come outside. We need to talk. I showed the message to Laura, who paled when she read it. He's not going to give up easily, she said. I'm counting on it. Scott Williams is about to discover that threatening a systems engineer with security cameras and a paper trail is a very bad idea. I called Victor Mendez and put the phone on speaker. Scott's outside our house right now, I said. Laura's with me, and she's figured out what he really is. I think he's about to do something stupid. I'm 10 minutes away, Victor said. Keep the doors locked and don't engage with him directly. Let him make the first move. Laura and I watched from the living room window as Scott sat in his truck, probably trying to figure out his next move. He'd lost his primary target, his con game had been exposed, and his threats had been documented and reported to the police. But men like Scott Williams don't accept defeat gracefully. They escalate. At 9:15 p.m., he got out of his truck and walked across the street to our front door. Instead of knocking, he began pounding on it with his fist, hard enough to rattle the frame. Laura, he shouted. I know you're in there. Come outside so we can talk. I activated the security system, which immediately began recording everything Scott was doing. The motion-activated floodlights illuminated him like an actor on a stage, and the cameras captured every detail of his increasingly erratic behavior. Laura, don't let him poison your mind with lies. You know what we have together. He moved to the living room window and began pounding on the glass, his face twisted with rage and desperation. This wasn't the smooth, confident yoga instructor who seduced married women with philosophical wisdom. This was a cornered predator showing his true nature. "Should I call the police?" Laura asked. "Not yet. Let him dig his hole a little deeper." Scott circled the house, testing doors and windows, looking for a way inside. The security cameras tracked his every move, building a comprehensive record of his trespassing and attempted breaking and entering. Victor's car pulled into the driveway just as Scott was trying to force open the back door. The two men faced each other in our backyard, Scott's gym muscles versus Victor's military training and street smarts. "You need to leave," Victor said calmly. "You're trespassing on private property." "This is between me and Laura," Scott replied. "Mind your own business. Laura's made her choice. She's inside with her husband, working on saving her marriage. Your con game is over." Scott lunged at Victor, who sidestepped the attack and dropped him to the ground with a move that looked almost effortless. Scott scrambled to his feet, his face scraped and bruised from where he'd hit the concrete patio. "You broke my nose," he screamed. "You fell down," Victor said. "Clumsy of you." The police arrived 5 minutes later, summoned by neighbors who'd heard the shouting and seen the commotion in our backyard. They found Scott Williams injured and incoherent, ranting about stolen wives and conspiracy theories, while Victor calmly explained the situation. I provided the officers with copies of my previous police reports, the security footage of Scott's behavior, and the recording of his threats from our Starbucks meeting. Laura gave a statement about his harassment and manipulation, describing how he'd systematically isolated her from her family and friends. Scott was arrested for trespassing, attempted breaking and entering, and assault. As the police car pulled away, he stared at our house through the rear window with the expression of a man who'd just realized his carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. "Is it over?" Laura asked, watching the taillights disappear around the corner. "The criminal charges are just the beginning," I said. "Scott Williams is about to discover that destroying families has consequences." Laura and I spent the rest of the evening talking, really talking, for the first time in months. She told me about Scott's manipulation techniques, how he'd gradually convinced her that I was controlling and emotionally harmful. I told her about the investigation, the security measures, and the plan to protect our family from predators who targeted suburban marriages. "I want to withdraw the divorce papers," she said as we sat together on our living room couch. "Are you sure? This won't be easy. We have a lot of trust to rebuild." "I'm sure. Scott Williams almost destroyed our family, but he also showed me what I really value. I don't want to lose you, Jason. I don't want to lose us." I kissed my wife for the first time in months, tasting tears and hope and the possibility of redemption. Outside, our quiet suburban street had returned to normal, but inside our house, something fundamental had shifted. The trap had sprung, the predator had been caught, and my family was whole again. 3 weeks after Scott Williams' arrest, I thought our nightmare was over. Laura had withdrawn the divorce papers, we'd started marriage counseling, and the girls were beginning to relax as their parents worked on rebuilding their relationship. Scott was facing multiple criminal charges and had been fired from his gym job after the other complaints against him surfaced. I should have known he wouldn't go quietly. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday evening while I was helping Janie with her math homework. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You destroyed my life. Time to return the favor." I showed the message to Laura, who paled when she read it. "He's supposed to be in jail," she said. "He made bail yesterday. Victor warned me this might happen." I called Victor immediately and put the phone on speaker. "Scott's out and making threats," I said. "How worried should I be?" "Very worried. I've been tracking his movements since he was released. He's been driving past your house, your work, the girls' school. This guy's obsessed and dangerous. What's our next move? Increase security, document everything, and prepare for him to escalate. Men like Williams don't accept defeat. They get revenge." That night, Laura and I sat the girls down for a difficult conversation about safety and strangers. We didn't mention Scott by name, but we explained that someone might try to contact them or approach them, and that they should immediately find a trusted adult if anything unusual happened. "Is this about the man who was yelling outside our house?" Beth asked with the directness of a 13-year-old who'd figured out more than her parents realized. "Yes," I said. "He's angry with Mom and me, and we want to make sure you and Janie stay safe while the police handle the situation." "Are we in danger?" Janie asked, her 9-year-old voice small and worried. We're being very careful, Laura said, pulling our youngest daughter into a hug. Dad has cameras and alarms, and we have friends helping us. Nothing bad is going to happen to our family. I hope she was right. The next morning, I drove the girls to school and noticed a black pickup truck following us at a distance. Scott was being careful to stay back, probably trying to avoid another arrest, but his surveillance was obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. At work, I called the police and filed another report. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic but realistic about what they could do. Unless he violates the restraining order or commits another crime, our hands are tied, she said. Following people on public roads isn't illegal, even if it's creepy and threatening. So we just wait for him to do something violent? Document everything. Keep your security system active. And be prepared to call emergency if he approaches your property again. I spent the day installing additional security measures at the house, more cameras, motion sensors, and a panic button that would immediately alert the police and Victor if activated. Our suburban home was beginning to look like a fortress, but I wasn't taking any chances with my family's safety. That evening, Diana came over for dinner with her own daughter. Having extra people in the house made everyone feel safer, and the girls enjoyed having a friend to play with while the adults discussed security arrangements. How long can this go on? Diana asked while we watched the kids play video games in the living room. Until Scott Williams accepts that his con game is over and moves on to easier targets, I said. Or until he does something stupid enough to get himself locked up for a long time. What if he doesn't give up? Laura and I exchanged glances. We'd been asking ourselves the same question for days. Then we escalate, I said. Scott Williams isn't the only one who can play psychological games. At 10 p.m., after Diana and her daughter had gone home and our girls were in bed, Scott made his move. The security system detected motion in our backyard, and the cameras showed him trying to disable the floodlights with a baseball bat. He's trying to create a blind spot, I told Laura as we watched the live feed on my phone. Should I call the police? Not yet. Let's see what he's really planning. Scott moved methodically around the house, testing windows and doors, looking for weaknesses in our security. He was wearing dark clothes and a ski mask, clearly planning something more serious than the emotional outburst that had gotten him arrested before. My phone buzzed with a text. Send Laura outside or I'm coming in to get her. Now we call the police, I said, dialing emergency. But Scott didn't wait for a response to his ultimatum. The sound of breaking glass came from the kitchen, followed by the piercing wail of our alarm system. He'd smashed the back door and was inside our house. Stay here, I told Laura. Grabbing the baseball bat I kept in our bedroom closet. Jason, don't. He's in our house, threatening our children. I'm not hiding while a predator stalks my family. I crept down the hallway toward the kitchen, following the sound of Scott's movements as he searched the first floor. The alarm was still screaming, which meant the police would arrive soon, but I couldn't wait for backup while he was loose in my house with my daughters sleeping upstairs. I found him in the living room, holding a crowbar and methodically destroying our family photos. He'd removed his ski mask, and his face was twisted with rage and something that might have been madness. Looking for something? I asked, stepping into the doorway with my bat raised. Scott spun around, his eyes wild and unfocused. Where is she? Where's Laura? Say from you, it's over, Scott. The police are on their way, and this time you're not making bail. She belongs with me, he screamed, swinging the crowbar at a framed photo of our wedding day. I saved her from you. You manipulated her. There's a difference. Scott advanced toward me, raising the crowbar like a tool. I'm going to destroy everything you care about, just like you destroyed my life. Your life was already destroyed. I just documented it. The sound of sirens was growing louder, but Scott seemed oblivious to everything except his rage. He lunged at me with the crowbar, and I sidestepped the attack while bringing my bat down on his wrist. The crowbar clattered to the floor, and Scott howled in pain. My arm! You broke my arm! You broke into my house and threatened my family. Consider yourself lucky, that's all I broke. The police burst through the front door just as Scott was trying to retrieve his tool with his uninjured hand. They found him on the floor of my living room, surrounded by broken glass and destroyed family photos, while I stood over him with a baseball bat. He broke in through the back door, I told the officers. There's security footage of the whole thing. Scott was arrested again, this time for breaking and entering, burglary, criminal mischief, and violating a restraining order. The charges were serious enough that bail was denied, and his public defender advised him to accept a plea deal that would put him in prison for 3 to 5 years. Is it really over this time? Laura asked as we watched the ambulance take Scott away to have his broken wrist treated before booking. It's over, I said. Scott Williams is going to prison, and when he gets out, he'll be a registered offender with a record that will follow him for the rest of his life. His con game days are finished. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed with my wife beside me and my daughters safe in their rooms down the hall. The house was quiet except for the normal sounds of suburban morning, birds singing, cars starting, neighbors beginning their daily routines. I made breakfast for my family while Laura got the girls ready for school. Normal activities that felt precious after weeks of living under siege from a predator who'd tried to destroy everything we'd built together. Dad, are we safe now? Beth asked over her cereal. We're safe, I said. The bad man is in jail, and he's not coming back. Good, Janie said with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a 9-year-old. I didn't like him. Neither did I, sweetheart. Neither did I. After dropping the girls at school, Laura and I drove to the courthouse to watch Scott Williams enter his guilty plea. He looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, diminished by the reality of consequences he'd never faced before. His lawyer read a prepared statement accepting responsibility for his actions and expressing remorse for the harm he'd caused. But when Scott looked across the courtroom at us, his eyes held no remorse, only the cold hatred of a predator who'd been outmaneuvered by his intended victims. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. He would also be required to register as a stalker and pay restitution for the damage he'd caused to our property and our lives. Mr. Williams, the judge said before passing sentence, you targeted a family with systematic harassment and manipulation. You broke into their home and threatened their safety. This court will not tolerate predatory behavior disguised as romance. As the bailiffs led Scott away in shackles, he turned back to stare at Laura one last time. But the spell was broken, the manipulation exposed, and the woman he'd tried to control was sitting beside her husband, holding his hand and facing the future together. Outside the courthouse, Victor was waiting with a smile and a handshake. How does it feel to win? He asked. Like justice, I said. Scott Williams spent years destroying families and manipulating vulnerable women. It's time he faced the consequences. What's next for you and Laura? I looked at my wife, who was already talking about picking up the girls from school and planning dinner for our family. Normal, everyday concerns that felt like miracles after everything we'd been through. We rebuild, I said. We work on our marriage, we raise our daughters, and we remember that love is stronger than manipulation when good people fight back. That evening, our family sat around the dinner table together for the first time in months. No phones, no distractions, no threats lurking outside our windows. Just a husband and wife and 2 beautiful daughters sharing a meal and planning their future. Scott Williams had tried to destroy us with lies and manipulation and violence. Instead, he'd made us stronger, more committed to each other, and more grateful for what we had. The predator was in prison, the family was whole, and justice had been served.